The moment my husband, David, slammed the inheritance waiver onto the marble kitchen island, he wasn't looking at me like a partner. He was looking at me like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "Sign it, Emily," he muttered, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Sign it over to my mother, or I promise you, by tomorrow morning, you won't even have the legal right to step foot in our daughter's school. I will strip you of custody so fast your head will spin." Behind him stood my mother-in-law, Evelyn. She didn't say a word. She just leaned against the doorframe, a smug, victorious smile playing on her lips, casually sipping her tea. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought they were stripping me of my father's legacy, leaving me with absolutely nothing. What they didn't know was that by forcing my hand to sign that piece of paper, they hadn't ruined me. They had just signed the warrant for their own absolute financial destruction. Before we dive into how I executed my revenge and exposed their greed, if you enjoy dramatic stories like this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me bring more of these incredible stories to life. Also, I love connecting with my audience, so please leave a comment below, letting me know which country or state you are listening to my story from. Now, to understand how a marriage of 7 years turned into a high-stakes legal war, we have to go back exactly 6 months, to the day my father's heart failed, and a secret buried for 30 years began to unravel. For 7 years, I believed I was living the standard American dream. I met David in college. He was charming, ambitious, and came from a family that fiercely protected its old money reputation in Connecticut. My background was different. My father, Thomas, was a self-made man. He owned a commercial construction and concrete framing company. He wore muddy boots to dinner, worked 16-hour days, and built his wealth from the dirt up. Evelyn, David's mother, never let me forget that. To her, my father was new money, crude, unrefined, and temporary. Whenever we attended family dinners at Evelyn's estate, the passive-aggressive remarks were constant. "Oh, Emily, dear," Evelyn would say during a family barbecue, making sure David's entire family could hear. "It's so fascinating how your father handles those blue-collar workers. I suppose someone has to do the heavy lifting, but David's family has always focused on intellectual investments. Asset management, you see. It's just a different class of intellect." I used to look at David, expecting him to defend me, but he would always just smile, pat my knee under the table, and whisper, "She's just old-fashioned, Em. Don't cause a scene." Let it go, so I let it go. I stayed quiet. I focused on raising our 5-year-old daughter, Lily. I played the part of the supportive wife, while David climbed the ranks at his boutique investment firm. I even ignored the fact that David had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before our wedding, an agreement drafted by Evelyn's personal lawyers, ensuring that if we ever divorced, I would leave with nothing but my personal belongings. At the time, I didn't care. I loved him, and I didn't marry him for his family's money. But everything changed when my father collapsed on a job site. My father's death shattered me. He was my anchor. But while I was drowning in grief, I noticed an immediate, unsettling shift in my husband and mother-in-law. The day after the funeral, I was sitting in our living room, staring blankly at a photo of my dad. David walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He sat down next to me, but he didn't put his arm around me. Instead, he cleared his throat and leaned in. "Emily," he began, trying to force a sympathetic tone into his voice. "I know it's incredibly early, and I hate to bring this up while you're grieving, but we need to talk about your dad's estate. Thomas's construction company was doing massive commercial contracts. He owned prime real estate downtown." I looked up at him, my eyes red. "David, my dad was just buried yesterday. I can't think about contracts right now." "I know, honey, I know," he said quickly, brushing his hand against mine. "But you have to be smart. Evelyn and I were talking. A construction company is a logistical nightmare for a grieving woman to manage. There are liabilities, union contracts, equipment depreciation. You don't have the training for that. My firm can take over the asset management immediately. We just need to get the paperwork filed to transfer the executive control." Before I could even respond, the front door clicked open. Evelyn walked in unannounced, carrying a folder. "David is entirely correct, Emily," Evelyn said, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "Your father's business was chaotic. If you leave it sitting out there in limbo, the state will tax it to oblivion. Furthermore, David is an investment professional. It's only logical that your father's assets are brought under our family umbrella. We can restructure the commercial properties, liquidate the heavy machinery, and put the cash into a trust that David controls. A trust that David controls. The words echoed in my mind. I looked at the folder Evelyn laid on the table. It was already filled with corporate restructuring templates and power of attorney forms. They hadn't even waited for the dirt on my father's grave to dry before they started mapping out how to absorb his life's work. I haven't even met with my father's corporate lawyer yet, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. The reading of the will is on Thursday. Evelyn smiled, a cold, practiced expression. Of course, dear. We will go with you. After all, we are a family, and we protect our interests. On Thursday morning, the atmosphere inside the office of Arthur Vance, my father's lifelong attorney, was thick with tension. Arthur was a sharp, gray-haired man who had known me since I was a child. David sat on my left, dressed in a custom three-piece suit, looking like he was preparing to buy a company rather than attend a reading of a will. Evelyn sat on my right, her designer handbag resting on her lap, her eyes locked onto the manila folder in Arthur's hands. Arthur adjusted his glasses, looked at me with deep sympathy, and then glanced at David and Evelyn. Emily, Arthur began, ignoring the other two in the room. Your father loved you deeply. His primary goal was always to ensure that you, and only you, were secure. I will skip the standard legal jargon and read the primary execution clauses of his last will and testament. Arthur opened the folder. David leaned forward, his pen already in his hand. To my daughter, Emily, Arthur read, I leave the full, unmitigated ownership of Thomas & Sons Construction, LLC, including all outstanding commercial contracts, corporate accounts, and the physical headquarters on 4th Street. However, per the special structural clause added to the corporate bylaws 3 months ago, the company cannot be sold, merged, or transferred to any external entity or spouse for a period of 5 years following my passing. If any attempt is made to legally transfer control out of Emily's direct name, the entire corporate entity immediately defaults into a protected legal receivership controlled by Vance & Associates Legal Trust. David's pen snapped against the desk. The color instantly drained from his face. Wait, what? David interrupted, his professional facade slipping. That's absurd. She is his daughter and I am her husband. Our finances are legally intertwined. That clause violates standard marital property rights. Arthur raised an eyebrow, looking over his glasses at David. Mr. Sterling, this is a private corporate entity, not standard marital property. Thomas built this shield intentionally. He knew exactly how the financial sector operates. The company stays in Emily's name, or it locks down completely. There is no loophole. Evelyn tightened her grip on her handbag, her eyes narrowing into slits as she stared at Arthur. And what about the liquid capital? The cash accounts? The personal real estate? Arthur turned the page. The personal real estate, specifically the family home, and the primary cash accounts totaling $6.2 million are left entirely to Emily. However, there is a condition. Arthur paused, looking directly at me before continuing. The cash is currently tied to a corporate bond structure. To activate the personal release of the $6.2 million into Emily's private account, she must sign a standard corporate acceptance waiver within 30 days. If she fails to sign it, or if she signs a liability transfer waiver to any third party or family member, the $6.2 million is permanently frozen and automatically rerouted to pay off the outstanding municipal debt and unindexed environmental cleanup liabilities attached to Thomas's old industrial sector projects. David didn't hear the word liabilities. His eyes only caught the figures. $6.2 million. He leaned back, exchanging a quick, subtle look with his mother. Evelyn's expression instantly changed from anger to absolute calculation. They didn't care about the company anymore. They wanted the cash. The moment we got home, the mask completely came off. David didn't ask me how I felt about my father's final wishes. He didn't offer comfort. Instead, he spent the next 3 days pacing around the house, talking on the phone with his mother in hushed, aggressive whispers. On the 4th night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of typing in the home office. I walked downstairs and saw David sitting at his desk, surrounded by legal documents. David? I whispered. What are you doing? He jumped slightly, shutting his laptop before looking up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. Nothing, Emily, just Looking over our financial portfolios. With your dad's cash coming in, we need to restructure our debts. My mother wants to buy a lake house in upstate New York, and I promised her we could finance it through our new joint capital. Our joint capital? I asked, my voice tightening. David, that money is what my dad built for Lily's future and my security. And Arthur said it's tied to specific corporate bonds. David stood up, walking over to me and grabbing my shoulders. His grip was tighter than usual. Emily, listen to me. Your dad was a construction worker. He didn't understand high-level asset management. My mother's lawyers are drafting a private internal family waiver. If you sign the liability and asset transfer over to Evelyn's family trust, my firm can bypass the corporate bond restrictions and liquidate the cash within a week. We can avoid the taxes entirely. But Arthur said if I sign a liability transfer to a third party, the money could be frozen or rerouted to corporate debts, I argued. Stepping back from him, David's face darkened. Arthur's a small-town lawyer, Emily. Trust my mother. Trust me, we know what we are doing. Tomorrow morning, Evelyn is bringing the paperwork. You are going to sign it. The next morning, the trap was officially set. Evelyn arrived at 9 a.m. She didn't say good morning. She walked straight into the kitchen, pulled a thick document from her bag, and laid it on the marble island. Sign it. Emily, David said, his voice dropping into that cold, threatening tone we heard at the very beginning of our story. Sign it over to my mother, or I promise you, by tomorrow morning, you won't even have the legal right to step foot in our daughter's school. I will strip you of custody. My mother's lawyers already have the custody filing ready. They will paint you as emotionally unstable after your father's death. You will lose Lily, and you will leave this house with absolutely nothing. Evelyn smiled, taking a slow sip of her tea. It's for the best, dear. A woman of your background shouldn't be handling millions of dollars anyway. Let the professionals handle it. I looked at David, my husband, the man I had supported for 7 years. He was staring at me with complete coldness, entirely willing to destroy my relationship with my daughter just to get his hands on my father's money. In that exact moment, something inside me snapped. The sadness and grief evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, freezing anger. I looked down at the document. It was titled, Full Corporate Asset and Liability Transfer Waiver. They thought they were forcing a victim into submission. They didn't realize I had spent the previous evening on the phone with Arthur Vance. I looked up, smiled directly at Evelyn, and picked up the pen. Fine, I said softly. If this is what you want, I'll sign it. I signed my name on the dotted line with total precision. David let out a massive sigh of relief, instantly grabbing the paper from my hands like a kid opening a Christmas present. Smart choice, Emily. Trust me, this is better for everyone. Evelyn put her tea down, her eyes gleaming with pure greed. Excellent. I will have my legal team file this with the bank and the state corporate registry immediately. The lake house contract is closing in 3 days, David. Make sure the wire transfer is authorized the moment the funds hit our trust. They didn't waste a single second. Within 2 hours, Evelyn's high-priced lawyers had officially filed the liability and asset transfer waiver to the corporate registry, legally taking full responsibility for the specific financial sector my dad had carved out. 3 days later, I was sitting on the back patio, drinking coffee and watching Lily play in the yard. Suddenly, the front door slammed open so hard the glass rattled. David stumbled out onto the patio. His face wasn't smug anymore. It was completely pale, covered in sweat, and his hands were violently shaking. He was holding his phone. Emily, he choked out, his voice cracking. What did your father do? What's wrong, David? I asked, not moving an inch. The bank? The state registry? David stammered, dropping to his knees near my chair. My mother's corporate accounts. They've been completely frozen. The state just issued an emergency asset seizure warrant against Evelyn's entire family trust. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Oh, you mean the liability clause? Right on cue, David's phone rang. It was Evelyn. Even without the speakerphone on, I could hear her screaming at the top of her lungs, completely hysterical. David! The federal regulators are at my house. They are serving an environmental remediation lawsuit. They say our trust just legally assumed $14 million in unindexed hazardous waste cleanup liabilities from Thomas's old industrial projects. They are liquidating my estate to pay for it. David looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror. You knew this would happen? I didn't know, I said, leaning forward, my voice turning to ice. My father knew. You see, David? My dad wasn't just a blue-collar worker who didn't understand finance. He was a brilliant businessman. 3 months before he died, he discovered that your boutique investment firm had been illegally shorting his company's commercial stocks, trying to drive his business into bankruptcy so your family could buy the real estate for cheap. David gasped, his mouth hanging open. My dad didn't confront you, I continued, standing up and looking down at him. Instead, he set a trap. He intentionally separated his real wealth, the $6.2 million and the main construction company, and locked them inside a protected legal receivership that you could never touch. Then he took his old, defunct industrial sector entity, the one filled with millions of dollars of unresolved environmental cleanup debts, and labeled it as the asset and liability transfer portfolio in his will. I knelt down right in front of his face. Arthur told me everything the night before. He told me that if I signed that paper, I wasn't giving you my dad's money. I was giving your mother full, legal, unmitigated ownership of a $14 million debt. By forcing my hand, by threatening to take my daughter away from me, you didn't rob me, David. You legally transferred your mother's entire old money fortune over to the state to pay for my dad's old industrial cleanups. The fallout was catastrophic for the Sterling family, because Evelyn's lawyers had rushed the filing without doing their due diligence. Purely driven by greed, the transfer was legally binding. Evelyn was forced to liquidate her historic Connecticut estate, her luxury vehicles, and her entire asset portfolio, just to satisfy the federal judgment. She went from old money royalty to living in a tiny, 2-bedroom rented apartment, entirely broken. As for David, his firm discovered his illegal stock manipulation through the federal audit triggered by the seizure. He was fired within a week, his professional license was permanently revoked, and he is currently facing a grand jury indictment for financial fraud. The day after his firm fired him, I served him with divorce papers. Because of the prenuptial agreement that Evelyn had so brilliantly insisted on years ago, David couldn't touch a single penny of my personal property. And because he was now facing criminal charges and had zero income, the judge granted me sole legal and physical custody of Lily without hesitation. Today, I run Thomas & Sons Construction. The $6.2 million cash bond cleared perfectly into my private account last month, fully protected. Lily has a secure future, and I have my father's legacy. My husband and his mother tried to use their intellectual investments to ruin a blue-collar family. But in the end, they learned the most expensive lesson of their lives. Never mistake a self-made man's silence for weakness.